Imagine a frigid November morning in 1326, the air sharp with frost, and the marketplace in Hereford buzzing with a restless energy. It's not merchants or traders filling the square today, but a crowd of nobles, priests, and common folk, their eyes locked on a wooden platform, where a gaunt, hollow-eyed man is dragged forward. His name is Hugh Despenser the Younger, once the second most powerful man in England, trusted by the king, feared by the court. Now, he's a broken figure, a symbol of betrayal and corruption, about to face an execution so brutal it will echo through the ages, castrated, disemboweled, torn apart before a roaring mob. Why did this man, who once held England in his grip, fall so far? Was he just a greedy noble who clawed his way too high? Or was he something more? A king's lover? A scandal whispered in the shadows? Welcome to Grim Chronicles, where we unravel history's darkest tales. Tonight, we're diving into the rise and fall of Hugh Despenser, a story of ambition, power, and a punishment so horrific it still haunts British history. Let's step back to a kingdom on the brink, where loyalty could crown you or crush you. Born around 1286, Hugh Despenser the Younger came into a world where power was a birthright, but keeping it was a battle. His father, Hugh Despenser the Elder, was a respected noble, a loyal servant to King Edward I, the fierce warrior known as the Hammer of the Scots. His mother, Isabel Beauchamp, carried the blood of the powerful Earl of Warwick. From the cradle, Hugh was steeped in privilege, raised in the glittering but treacherous halls of England's elite. This wasn't a world of chivalry and honor. It was a chessboard where every move could be your last. Young Hugh learned the art of courtly manners, the clash of swords, and the subtle dance of noble politics. But he wasn't content to be just another aristocrat, collecting titles and estates. He was ambitious, calculating, with a hunger that burned for something greater, true power. He didn't want to sit at the table, he wanted to own it. The stage for Hugh's rise was set in 1307, when Edward II took the throne. Edward was a king cut from a different cloth than his father. Where Edward I was stern and battle-hardened, Edward II was guided by his heart, a man whose emotions often outreign his judgment. And those emotions seemed to fixate on certain men. His first favorite, Piers Gaveston, was a charming, swaggering noble who swept into court and into Edward's affections, much to the fury of the old guard. The nobility despised Gaveston, not just for his arrogance, but for the way he monopolized the king's attention, wielding influence that rivaled their own. By 1312, their patience broke. Gaveston was hunted down and murdered by a coalition of barons, a bloody message to anyone who dared get too close to the crown. But where one favorite fell, another saw opportunity. That's where Hugh Despenser stepped in. By 1316, Hugh had maneuvered himself into the role of royal chamberlain, a position that placed him at Edward's side every single day. In the medieval court, proximity was everything. Control the king's ear, and you controlled the kingdom. Hugh didn't just play this game, he mastered it. He married Eleanor de Clare, Edward's niece, binding himself to the royal family and securing vast lands in Glamorgan, Wales. With every step, his influence grew. But so did his greed. Hugh wasn't subtle about it. He seized estates through dubious legal tricks, sometimes outright extortion. He even forced his own sister-in-law to surrender valuable property. The nobility watched, their resentment simmering, as Hugh's wealth and power swelled. By 1321, his overreach sparked a baronial revolt, forcing Edward to exile him. You'd think that would be the end of Hugh's story, but he was far from finished. In exile, he turned pirate, attacking English merchant ships like a medieval crime lord with a vendetta. It was bold, reckless, and utterly in character. In 1322, Edward crushed the rebellion and called Hugh back to court. This time, it wasn't just favor, it was absolute dominance. For the next 4 years, Hugh and his father didn't just influence the crown. They were the crown. They controlled land, money, justice, even who could see the king. One chronicler wrote that Hugh was king in all but name. But power like that doesn't come without cost. The nobility loathed him, the commoners whispered of his corruption, and one person, in particular, was pushed beyond endurance. Queen Isabella, Edward's wife. Isabella, a sharp and formidable woman from France, had been sidelined as Hugh's influence grew. Her finances were slashed, her household dismantled, her own children taken and placed in the care of Hugh's wife. For Isabella, this wasn't just politics, it was a declaration of war. Sent to France in 1325 to negotiate a treaty, Isabella found not just an escape, but a spark. There, she met Roger Mortimer, a charismatic baron who defied Edward and Hugh, escaping the Tower of London to plot his revenge from the continent. Mortimer was everything Hugh wasn't: shrewd, rebellious, and burning with rage. He and Isabella became lovers, their passion fueled by a shared hatred of the Despensers. Together they forged a plan that was nothing short of audacious: overthrow a sitting king and destroy Hugh Despenser once and for all. In September 1326, they landed in England with a small army of mercenaries. What they didn't expect was how quickly the tide would turn. Years of Hugh's abuses had left the nobility seething, and they flocked to Isabella's side, their resentment an unstoppable wave. Edward and the Despensers fled west, dragging the royal treasury with them, but their time was running out. Hugh the Elder was captured in Bristol, his execution swift and brutal. Hung in his armor, beheaded and quartered. Edward and Hugh the Younger made it as far as Wales before betrayal caught up with them. Near Neath, they were seized. Edward would soon be imprisoned, forced to abdicate in favor of his teenage son, the future Edward III. But for Hugh Despenser, there would be no cell, no exile, only a fate designed to terrify and humiliate. On November 24th, 1326, in Hereford's marketplace, Hugh faced his reckoning. The crowd roared as guards tied him to a tall ladder, ensuring every eye could witness his torment. A crown of nettles was placed on his head, a cruel parody of the power he'd once held. Bible verses condemning pride and wickedness were scrawled across his skin. His body turned into a living sermon. Then, the real horror began. Chronicler Jean Froissart recounts the executioners slicing off Hugh's genitals and tossing them into a fire as he watched, a punishment tied to accusations of a sexual relationship with Edward II, what the church branded as sodomy, a sin and a crime in their eyes. While he was still alive, they cut open his abdomen, pulling out his entrails to burn them before the cheering mob. His screams, described as an inhuman howl, pierced the square. Only then was he hanged, beheaded, and quartered, his body parts sent to every corner of England as a warning. His head was spiked above London's gates, a grim trophy of a fallen favorite. This wasn't just an execution, it was theater. A public cleansing meant to erase Hugh's influence and send a message: defy the natural order, and this is your fate. But the story doesn't end with Hugh's mutilated body. Edward II, the king had served so loyally, met an equally disturbing end. Imprisoned in Berkeley Castle, he was kept alive at first, a disgraced monarch hidden from the world. But by September 1327, he was too dangerous to live. The most infamous account claims he was killed with a red-hot poker thrust into his body, a method chosen to leave no outward scars, but deliver a brutal message. Whether true or propaganda, the symbolism was undeniable. Both Hugh and Edward paid a price for their bond, a relationship their enemies painted as corrupt and unnatural. Isabella and Mortimer, the architects of their downfall, reveled in their victory, but it was short-lived. By 1330, Edward III, now 17, had grown weary of their rule. In a daring coup, he seized power, arresting Mortimer and executing him for treason. Isabella was quietly sidelined, her influence stripped away. The wheel of power had turned once more. Hugh Despenser's execution wasn't just about punishment. It was a ritual, a spectacle designed to restore order in a kingdom shaken by his influence. Historians today question the medieval narrative, wondering if accusations of sodomy were less about truth and more about political destruction. Was Hugh's relationship with Edward romantic, platonic, or something else entirely? We'll never know for certain. But the fear of their closeness, the idea that a man could wield such power through intimacy, rattled the foundations of a rigid patriarchal world. His punishment was meant to be unforgettable, a lesson carved in blood and fire. Yet in a strange twist, 4 years later, Hugh's widow, Eleanor, was granted permission to collect what remained of him, his head, a femur, scraps of bone, and bury them at their family estate. A quiet, almost merciful end for a man who'd once held England in his grip. Centuries later, Hugh Despenser's story still captivates us, not because of noble deeds or heroic acts, but because of the sheer extremity of his downfall. He's been called one of the greatest villains of the 14th century, his life reimagined in novels and dramas as the ultimate court manipulator, greedy, ruthless, seductive. But modern historians see a more complex picture. Yes, Hugh was ambitious and corrupt, but his vilification was amplified by politics, homophobia, and religious fervor. Accusations of sodomy were a weapon in medieval Europe, a way to discredit enemies without needing proof. The real danger of Hugh's story lies not in his crimes, but in what he represented: a disruption of order, of gender, of hierarchy, of masculinity itself. His execution was a public purging, a warning to anyone who dared challenge the system. And yet, we're not so different today. We still crave the spectacle of a powerful figure's fall, whether in a medieval marketplace or on a digital screen. Hugh wasn't born a monster. He was a man of privilege and ambition, navigating a world where loyalty could crown you or crush you. His bond with Edward II, whatever its nature, was both his ladder to power and the noose around his neck. And that, dear viewers, is the heart of this grim chronicle, a reminder that power, desire, and politics are a dangerous dance, one that can end in flames. Thanks for joining us on this journey through history's shadows. If this tale of blood and betrayal gripped you, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and join us next time on Grim Chronicles for another dive into the past's darkest corners. Until then, keep wondering, what stories are waiting to be told?